Hi, my name is Callie Chappelle, and welcome to this video, Introduction to Debate Theory. This video is part of the Novice Go Fight Win series, a debate series of videos that teach novices how to do policy debate. So, quick introduction, my name is Callie Chappelle. I'm a former debater for the University of Michigan. I debated for Traverse City Central High School, and I currently coach for Gulliver Prep. I'm a 2-1-1A, and a fun fact about me is I've actually become kind of a theory hack. So, to make the most out of these videos, you should take notes and rewatch bits you need re-explained. This video is a pretty big overview of theory, so you don't need to take a bunch of notes, but what I am really trying to get out of this video for you is to explain kind of how to understand how to conceptualize theory overall. So hopefully we'll have worksheets and or supplemental materials. Actually, probably not for this video, but check out the video description to see if I post anything. You don't need to memorize everything in this video, but you should be familiar with everything. Really, as I said before, it's just kind of a foundational set of concepts that I want you to understand about debate theory, whether it's topicality, conditionality, or some other kind of theoretical argument like counterplan theory. Also, your coach may like things differently, or you may debate a different style. It's totally okay. This is just one starting point, not an end point. However, I would argue that debate theory is pretty important no matter what kind of debating style you do. So, in debate, there are two general styles. There's substantive arguments and there are theory arguments. So, substantive arguments are what we normally talk about, and most of these videos are about substance, right? So, these are like the disads, counterplans, critiques. These are the kinds of things that have impacts like extinction or dehumanization or something like that. But on the other hand, there are theory arguments, and these are somewhat different in style. So theory arguments that you might have heard of include topicality, conditionality, PICs bad, performative contradictions. These are all arguments about whether or not certain arguments are theoretically legitimate. It's not about the nature or merit of arguments as the hypothetical invitation for plan. It's about whether or not the arguments that were made in this debate are theoretically legitimate. And these have impacts not like extinction or dehumanization, but like fairness and education. And these arguments are evaluated a priori to substance. So when I talk about a priori, this is what I mean. When a judge is evaluating a round, first the judge will ask themselves, who won the theory debate, okay? So who won topicality, who won conditionality, who won PICs bad, whatever. And then, once they determine who won the theory debate, or if the theory debate was a reason why one team should or should not lose, then they'll evaluate the substance debate and say, okay, let's say that the first thing I need to evaluate here is if the counterplan is legitimate. First, I'll figure out if the counterplan is legitimate and I should evaluate it in the first place. And then if I determine that yes, I should be able to evaluate the counterplan, who actually won the counterplan, right? Does the neg or the AF win? So that's what I mean when I'm saying that a judge evaluates theory arguments a priori to the substance debate. So D is counterplans, K is the AF. So what is debate theory? Well, one thing that I think is really cool about debate is that debaters actually get to debate about what the rules of the debate should be. Wow, I said debate so many times in a row, both in that debate and also in future debates. So it's super cool that you as a debater actually get to decide or argue about what the debate should even look like in the first place. Right? So the judge decides first whether the debate should be the way that it is before they can decide who actually won the substantive arguments in the debate, right? So, for example, if the neg team won on the K because they duct taped the other team's mouth shut, would that be fair or would that be educational? Of course not. It doesn't matter if you read a K and you won. If you did something in order to win, that was theoretically illegitimate, right? So think about this. If the neg team won on the K because they read 10 Ks and they only extended one in the block, would that be fair? Would that be educational? Well, that's actually a little bit more debatable, right? But it's the same kind of idea. If you win on something that's cheating, should you be allowed to win? And what's cool about debate is you actually get to determine whether or not you can. So regardless of the situation, the judge may decide whether what happened in the debate was fair and or whether what happened in the debate is a good precedent for a model of debate generally, right? So the judge is going to think about either that individual debate, is that fair or not, or if that debate was indicative of all debates on the topic, would that be a good way for the debate as an activity on a whole to be perpetrated? So how do people evaluate theory debates? So theory debates, there are two different ways to evaluate it. As I said, just in this debate, so what happened in this debate, was that legit? Or it's not what you do, it's what you justify. So if every single debate was followed by the same rules about what happened in this debate, would that be a good model for debate generally? So it's kind of like impact debate. So if you have an ethics impact where the ethics is just like the other team did something unethical, right? So they supported capitalism and that's unethical, for example. That's kind of like the just in this debate mindset when evaluating theory debates. But if you run a hypothetical extinction impact, right, so hypothetically if the plan was implemented and the result of the plan resulted in extinction or the result of not doing the plan resulted in extinction, that's kind of it's not what you do, it's what you justify. It's all about like the hypothetical world. If everything was this way, what would the impact be? And you need to explicitly state how the judge should evaluate the theory debate in the rounds. Usually you want to say it's the second, because it gives you more leeway to paint a picture about what the kind of impacts of what happened or the implications of what happened in this debate impact the debate community as a whole. So let's talk about those impacts. So what are the impacts in a theory debate? So let's first, before we talk about a theory debate, what are the types of impacts that could happen in a substantive debate? Well, in a substantive debate, remember these are like aft, counterplan, K, etc. There are two fundamental impacts, right? There's extinction, there's extinction of everything, and then there's ethics, with lots of different internal links, right? So how do we get to extinction? Well, sometimes we'll say it's nuclear war, sometimes we'll say it's global warming, sometimes it's pandemic, etc. And then, of course, how do we cause the ethics impact? It could be like they're being racist, or they're solving racism, sexism, homophobia, anthropocentrism, etc. But in a theory debate, it's kind of like this, where there are also two fundamental impacts, education and fairness, with lots of different internal links, right? So for education, we might say limits, clash, or for fairness, we might say ground or predictability. And I'm going to talk about what these words mean in a little bit. But what I want you to think about is how the impacts of a theory debate are fundamentally similar to in a substantive debate, where you have two big terminal impacts, but you have lots of different internal links, and the better team, the team who wins their impact, of course, is the team that better debates their internal links, right? So remember, magnitude, probability, and time frame are not actually describing extinction or ethics, the terminal impact. They're actually describing the likelihood of those internal links to get to that impact. So when you're impacting a theory debate, when you're talking about why what the other team did was theoretically illegitimate, you're not going to be talking about whether education or fairness is necessarily good or bad, but how what they did or what you are saying that they should have done better accesses education and fairness through a variety of internal links vis-a-vis limits, class, ground, predictability, etc. So let's talk about models of debate. So when we impact theory debates, we're not asking about whether we should prolong life or prevent extinction. We're actually asking about what an ideal debate community looks like. So here are some questions that you should ask yourself when you're thinking about impacting a theory debate, right? Should we we as a debate community read only a few arguments but go really, really in depth on them? Should we read lots of different arguments but just cursorily? Is it fair to read unpredictable arguments? Like, how much preparation should we expect from debaters, right? If you're reading really unpredictable arguments, if you're allowed to do really unpredictable things in debate, how does that impact the amount that one has to prepare before a tournament or before a round? How might your thoughts on this issue be colored about whether, depending on whether you go to a small school or a large school that has lots of coaches, whether you have lots of coaches or no coaches, whether you travel regionally or nationally? All of these things influence the way that we value different types of education and fairness and predictability and preparation and all sorts of different things. So when we talk about education and fairness, it's not just like we're for education, we're for fairness. No, it's like how does our own experiences color how we value these things, and how can we debate to our judge to create a very compelling image of what debate should look like under your specific interpretation of what's theoretically legitimate and what's not legitimate. So, like all debate arguments, different people have different intuitions on these questions. So it's actually the role of debate theory to hash out the better arguments in any given debate. So what are the parts of a theory argument? Well, there's three parts that are needed. The first is the violation. So what did the other team do that was theoretically illegitimate? What should they not have done? The second is interpretation. Like, what is the model of debate that you propose alternatively? So you can't just say what they did was bad. You have to say what they did was bad, and here's what we should do instead, okay? And then finally is standards and voters. So why is what they did bad, or why is your model better? So let's look at each of these parts individually. So the first part is the violation. So there are lots of different theory arguments, and each of these have their own set of violations. So topicality, if you want to know more about topicality, watch the T series. I kind of hope that you've watched the topicality lectures before you watch this, because it'll make a little bit more sense. Another theory argument is conditionality bad. That's going to have its own set of videos. Counterplan theory, like PICs bad, that's plan inclusive counterplans bad, or no neg fiat. There's K-theory, like framework, floating PICs bad, utopian alts bad, etc. Perm theory, like severance perms bad, intrinsic perms bad. Politics theory, like fiat shields the link, bottom of the docket, the intrinsic perm performative contradictions, or perfcon bad, and even more. So I know you're probably having a little heart attack because you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many different theory arguments, how am I going to learn all this? But don't worry, over time you'll learn them all. Really what I want you to get out of this video is the basics of how to think about theory and then how to impact it. So let's talk about the interpretation. So usually you want to craft an interpretation that's still fairly liberal and broad, but doesn't include what the other team did. This is most important in T, Condo, and counterplane theory debates. So if you're listening to this and you've never had a theory debate before, you're probably not going to understand exactly what I'm talking about with interpretation. That's okay. Really what you should do is after you've had a theory debate or after you've looked at your theory blocks, come back and rewatch this video because this will make more sense. Sometimes there's no interpretation of the shell. This is like a cool FYI, just so you know. That's okay. So judges will assume the interpretation, if there's not an interpretation given in the shell, is don't do what the other team did. For example, if your neg fiat block just gives reasons why neg fiat is bad but doesn't give an alternative interpretation, we as a judge will just assume the neg shouldn't have neg fiat. For example, if you read if you read a Condo block and you don't read an interpretation, we just assume the neg should not have conditional advocacies. And then the last part of the theory block is standards. So there are a couple different standards I want to talk about. The first is standards kind of within the category of limits, predictability, and clash. So most theoretically illegitimate arguments are illegit because they allow the AF or the neg to have too much leeway. So the idea of having what the AF can and cannot read or what the neg can and cannot read is a problem of limits, right? So the AF and neg are under-limited in what they can do. If they're under-limited, that means that they are not limited, which means that they can do whatever they want. So if the AF or neg can do whatever they want, it will be unpredictable for the other team. And if the other team can't predict their opponents, then they can't actually adequately prepare, which prevents good clash with yes-no argumentation, right? Because if I don't have answers to, so like, let's say you read an argument and you're like, plan, I should bring my grandma cookies. You'd be like, well, that's so unpredictable. How am I supposed to have good reasons? How am I supposed to know anything about your grandma to give good reasons why she shouldn't have cookies, right? Like, I don't know if she has diabetes. Like, I don't know if she should be eating cookies or not. So there's no way for me to respond very well to that argument, right? I can't research your grandma. Like, how am I supposed to do that, right? Which prevents this good clash, right? It prevents me from saying yes, no directly because I have no preparation, right? So this clash in preparation is usually assumed to be important for the education we gain from the debate. So how does this influence how much and what we research, right? If we can't prepare for something, how would that mean that you have to research everything? Does that mean that you just throw up your hands and say, whatever, I'm not researching anything? How does that impact our research? And second, what do we learn from these types of debates? If we're constantly being thrown into debates that we can or cannot predict, how does that influence what we're getting out of it at the end of the day? Are we always having to think on our feet and that's really great? Or is it just causing us to be frustrated because we can't seem to learn anything? And sometimes it's argued that these arguments are not fair for both teams. If you can't prepare for a round, that's not fair. That's not the model of debate we want to be reporting. So these are how you should be thinking about these limits, predictability, and clash arguments. The second kind of category of standards is contradictions in the real world. So some arguments are theoretically illegitimate not because they necessarily influence the limits or the scope of the debate, but because they're simply not realistic or pedagogically sound. So some of these style arguments include performative contradictions or perf-con or multiple worlds theory. So these are the arguments. This is the argument that the neg shouldn't simultaneously say conflicting things. For example, in econ DA and the cap K, right? So it seems like kind of theoretically iffy if the neg can simultaneously say the AF is bad, both because they increase the economy and they decrease the economy. That seems like not so great. Another example is topical counterplane's bad, right? So if the role of the AF is to defend the topic and the neg is also defending the topic, that just seems like pedagogically unsound. Like that doesn't seem like the way the debate should be. And also, like KL must have an alt text, right? That's something that's not clearly related to limits or ground, but it's just something that is just like another thing that it seems kind of unsavory that one or the other team does. So these arguments have less to do with limits and more about just theoretical objections to other stuff the other team may have done. So how do you impact the theory debate? We talked about this a little bit, but let's talk about actually how you win on impacting the theory debate, because it's a little bit different. We're not talking about predictability, time frame, magnitude. We're talking about sort of a different style of debating the impact. So you want to win how your model of debate is more educational or more fair than the other team's interpretation. Just like on a DA, you want to win that you cause more death, you cause more extinction, or the AF is more morally defunct. You want to win that your model of debate is more educational or more fair than the other team's interpretation, that the other team is less educational and less fair than yours. And then you also need to explain why does education or fairness matter in debate, right? Does it make it not fun to debate? Does it moot the benefits of debate in the real world? Does it make novices less likely to stay in the activity? Does it prevent certain groups of people from participating in the activity? Like, why does fairness or education even matter in the first place? You need to articulate both those things. First, how you solve for that, and also why that matters. So here's the general structure for how you debate theory, because if you're watching this video for the first time, you probably don't understand how a good theory debate actually goes down. So this is a very generic model for how these theory debates go down, and then I'm going to go through two specific examples with you. The first one, the first one's going to be Condo, and the second one is something else. We'll get to it. So first, when you have the initiating team, they'll say the X thing is bad, and they'll read a block. So oftentimes you'll have a huge set of theory blocks, and you can just pull the block that you want, or you can write one on the fly. Then, if the initiating team reads X theory against you, then the responding team needs to respond. They need to say that they say X is bad, but we say X is not as bad. And first they'll read their block, which is offense, right, that says that X thing is not bad, or that X thing is good, and then they'll respond to the points made in their opponent's block, which is their defense. So remember, we're talking about the offense-defense paradigm, and in the offense-defense paradigm of argumentation, regardless of whether it's for substance, which is generally how we talk about offense-defense, or in the context of theory, you, as either the aphrodite, have to win your offense, and you also to make sure that you're saying something that will get you to win the debate, but also you can mitigate your opponent's argument by reading defense. So again, remember that each team on theory has to both win their offense and their defense. Okay, so let's say the responding team does this. What is the initiating team? Well, the initiating team has to say, again, X is bad. They have to extend their own offense that were made in the block that was made in this speech. And then they also have to respond to points made in their opponent's last speech, which is defense, right? So they're going to respond to this person's block. And also, in part of extending their offense, they need to respond to their opponent's arguments against their own arguments. And of course, the last thing is the responding team, in response to this speech, needs to continue to say that X is not bad, extend their offense, answer their opponent's arguments against that offense, and then respond to their points respond to their opponent's offense, which is their defense, the responding team's defense. So what does this mean? So here's an example with conditionality. So I'm going to replicate this in the conditionality lectures after you understand conditionality a little bit better, but if you are watching this video and you already know a little bit about theory, this is what you need to be thinking about, okay? So let's say, 1 and C reads conditional advocacies. Let's say they read, like 1K and 1 counterpoint. Okay, the 2AC Condo block might look like this. Conditionality is reason to reject the team, time and strats queue, contradictions, advocacy, sales interpretation. Of course, you'd be reading all of this block in the actual debate. And in the 2 and C, you need to respond, or the 1 and R, you need to respond and say that conditionality is good. You give your counter interpretation. You give your reasons why that's good. Here in this case, so this is your offense, ideological flex, and breadth outweighs. And then you need to respond to theirs, right, that there's time and strats is inevitable, there's no contradictions, ideological flex and data scanning solves advocacies, and then respond to their interpretation, dispute doesn't solve, becomes functionally Condo, and then give another counter interpretation for how the judge should evaluate the debate, defaults of reasonability, not competing interpretations. Then of course, in the 1AR, they're going to extend the offense made in the block, right, so they're going to extend all of these and respond to the counter arguments, and then respond to make the points that were made in the opponent's last speech. So in the 1AR, you'd respond to ideological flex and breadth outweighs. And then finally, in the 2 and R, you do the same thing. You'd extend the offense that was made here in this block in the 2 and C, respond to the F arguments made on each point, and then respond to the points made in the opponent's last speech, that is the defensive argument. So I'm asking you, what would these speeches look like? If you're familiar with Condo, you should do that here. If you're not familiar with Condo, hang tight and watch the Condo lectures. The next example is pick bad, okay? So here's just another example, right, where 2AC, plan inclusive counterplans are bad for the reason of infinite regression, F Brown, education, counterplans check, encourages fake plan text, and then it's a vote of fairness education. So the 2AC would be the first time where you would initiate picks bad, because assumably they read a pick in the 1 and C, and then in the 2 and C, you would need to give reasons why your specific pick is good. So here are the examples: makes the active of the entire plan, seating net ground, encourages good research, jump over breadth, net benefit check, lit checks, and then solves infinite and then here's our answers to their specific argument: solves infinite regression, right? Because we're not defending all picks, just the one specific to the F. The counterplan, the advantage counterplanes don't check. This answers this guy because F ground education are answered above here. That's why I skipped over those. That's embedded into the extension of the offense here. So advantage counterplanes don't check, and then reject the argument, not the team. And then the 1AR perhaps decides not to go for counterplan theory, so you wouldn't have to extend anything here. So this is just another example of how these debates would go down. So how do you slay the theory debate? How do you really kick butt when you're debating theory. So there are two main goals when you want to debate theory well. The first is technicality. So the theory debate's extremely technical, and you have to clearly win your interpretation and your standards, as well as respond to all of your opponent's standards and their interpretation. So what does this mean? This means don't drop stuff, okay? I've seen so many terrible theory debates in the novice division, and actually in the varsity division too, where the other team simply drops a critical piece of the theory debate. They drop the interpretation, they drop the standards or something, and it's just like, I can't evaluate this, I don't have all the parts, right? You'd never read a DA and just drop uniqueness. No, you would never do that. So you also need to debate the theory debate with the same technicality as you would debate a substance debate. The second is impact calc. So what impacts is your interpretation access, and why do they outweigh your opponents? You would never win on a DA without doing any impact calc. You're never going to win on theory if you don't do impact calc there. It's just a little bit different. So let's talk about impact calc a little bit more. Like in most debates, this is usually done better by the team that explains their internal links better. So ask yourself these questions, right? Why are international counterplans bad for education? Do they result in the AF always losing to some other random country that can do the plan better, which incentivizes them to read scholarly AFs with obscure solvency mechanisms that no one would spend time researching an international actor mechanism for? What would that do for core generics? Why are core generics good? Why wouldn't you be researching international countries be good for debate? Like, why would it increase the AF research burden too much? Like, what would this do for small schools without coaches to cut cards? Like, how might this change the focus of debates away from the resolution? Like, every time you ask yourself, every time you make an assertion, right, like, bad for education, like, you need to ask yourself, why? Why is that? And the person who explains the why better in the debate is the person who's going to win the impact calc for the theory debate, right? So all of these things you can bring up when impacting the theory debate, obviously, but you're going to be asking the why questions for your particular argument. So what's the takeaway from this video? Well, you should have a good understanding of what debate theory is. You should understand how judges evaluate theory debates. You should understand the impact of a theory debate. You should know the parts of a theory argument, and you should have a good idea of the structure of a theory debate. And what I really want you to do is, the big takeaway here is now you should have all the skills to go and look at your theory blocks, ask your varsity what some of the words mean if you're not familiar with them, and then actually sit down and make sure you understand all of the words in that block. Because theory debates are so highly technical, it's extremely important for teams to try to cram as many words as possible, or as few words as possible into a theory block without wasting very much time. So what that results in is a huge amount of jargon, and they're just terms that everybody in the debate community kind of knows, but are really hard to like understand without someone explicitly explaining what that terminology means. For example, depth over breadth. For example, lit checks abuse. It's like, what the heck does that even mean? So what you need to do now is go through with your varsity, through your theory blocks, think about them, think about the impact calc kind of stuff that we talked about in this video, but make sure you understand what all of those terms mean, because that'll really help you in theory debates in the future, okay? So I hope that this was helpful. Theory has been a big request on Go Fight Win, so hopefully this answers most of your questions, and feel free to comment on the video if you have more.